Today, I'm immensely glad and privileged to introduce the resource person of today's session, Reverend Dr. Kurian Kachapalli, CMI, to you. So one can keep on speaking attributes and achievements of this person, like he's a person who holds masters in English literature and psychology other than philosophy, and one who has a doctorate and licentiate in philosophy from Leuven, Belgium, and one who is a TEDx speaker, one who is a guest faculty in reputed international universities, one who has published a lot of famous books and scientific journals, and a person who is currently the president of Dharmara Vidyashetram Bangalore, and the list goes like that. But among these attributes, and achievements, what values most for me is that he has been a teacher par excellence for the last 25 years. I am one of the thousands of students who always proudly boast that Father Kurian Kachapalli has taught me philosophy. I am one of those thousands of students. So I still remember those the days, those classes. One fine day, he would come to our class, and he would just, to our greater embarrassment, he would prove that God does not exist with a logical reasoning. And in the very next day, he would come to our class and prove, supported by a list of logical arguments, that God exists. So it was really exciting, wonderful classes, and I still remember those wonderful days as being a student in his class. So we are really proud to have Reverend Dr. Kurian Kachapalli, CMI, to be the guide in today's session, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you after a long time. So, Father Kurian, on behalf of the entire college, St. Joseph's College, Devagiri, on behalf of the management, the principal, and the whole faculty members, especially on behalf of the English department, I would like to extend a warm welcome to this session and wish you a very fruitful session. Thank you very much. And over to you, Father. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Father Anto. Am I audible?
Yes, Father.
Yes, Father.
Okay. Yeah, dear Father Anto, the Vice Principal, Brother Ajit, professors and scholars of St. Joseph's College, especially the Department of English Literature. That's what I am told. You can conveniently forget all what Father Anto said, because that's not the very important thing, because he's very kind to me. That's why he spoke well of. Now, today, my duty will be to introduce this well-known book by Samuel Clarke, a demonstration of the being and attributes of God. As you know, this is a collection of lectures called Richard Boyle Lecture Series, published in 1705. The lectures were delivered in 1704 and published in 1705. In this lecture series, there are 12 sections, and altogether around 90 plus pages. So maybe you can also read. It's not a big book, especially literature students. You should read and enjoy such books. Now, before we come to the book as such, a few words of caution. As the title sounds, it's a demonstration, it's a proof for the being, existence, and attributes, that is the nature of God. So I am going to take you to the world of philosophy and logic, because it's all about proof. Therefore, get ready to enter into the world of philosophy and logic. But a word of caution, I said, when we say God talk, we don't mean God talking to you and me. Rather, it's about human talk about God. That's the first point we have to keep in mind. Second, as we talk about God, the main tool we use is reason, rationality, not faith. I don't rule out faith, but in today's context, as we review the book, A Demonstration, our priority will be to see, evaluate the book from the perspective of reason. So these are the two important notes. Now, this book has two parts, as the title indicates. One is all about the existence of God, and second, about the nature or attributes, qualities of God. My focus will be on the first part, especially the argument or demonstration about the existence of God. In order to understand the logic of this proof, we have to keep in mind two important concepts. Hope you are there. I see about 70 people signed in. The two concepts, one I would say DB, dependent being, dependent being. The other, self-existent being, DB and SCB. Now, what is DB? A dependent being, a being whose existence is accounted for by the causal activity of the other. Once again, I repeat, DB is a being whose existence is accounted for by the causal activity of the other. In the words of St. Anselm, an existence explained by other, that is in simple terms. A being, an existence explained by other. Now, what is a CB? Self-existent being, whose existence is accounted for by its own nature or by itself. In Anselm terminology, a being explained by itself. Hope you are thorough with these two terms, DB and SCB, dependent being and self-existent being. Now, with the understanding of these two concepts, let's come to the logic, the syllogism. I don't know how many of you have studied a little bit of logic from literature, logic, yes. I moved from logic to literature and back to philosophy. That was my journey in my life. Now, syllogism has two propositions, the major, the minor, and the conclusion. Or in simple terms, the first proposition, the second proposition, and the third. The first two, we call it premises, the non-facts, and conclusion is the third, which is not known. Now, if you are ready, here is the syllogism. Every being is either a DB or SCB, either a DB or a CB. This is the first proposition, the major. Now, what is the minor? Not all being can be a DB. Oh. Not all being can be a DB. Therefore, there exists a SCB. Therefore, there exists a SCB. Hope you got the syllogism. The major, every being is either a DB or a CB. Minor, not every being can be a DB. The conclusion, therefore, there exists a self-existent being. Now, for Clarke, this self-existent being is what he understands as God. That is the very purpose of his demonstration, his argument. Now, if you are familiar with now this syllogism, let me give a general explanation of the veracity, the truthfulness of the conclusion. If you remember your logic, if you have studied, in logic, if both the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. In other words, if the conclusion is true, both the premises should be true. There is no other way in deductive logic. Once again, if both the premises are true, the conclusion will be true. Conversely, if the conclusion is true, both the premises have to be true. Now, the attempt of Clarke in his book, A Demonstration, is to prove that the major premise and the minor premise are true. Therefore, the conclusion ought to be true. Therefore, let us take the first major premise. Every being is either a DB, that is dependent being, or a CB, self-existent being. Now, the critics, or what we call the opponents, yeah, remember these two words. Critics or opponents. Then the other side, we have proponents or supporters. Hello? Are you following me?
Yes, Father. Yes.
Yeah, you can say hello or etc. in the chat box so that
Yes,
I can be sure you people are still awake, because this is philosophy and logic. Okay, and this is also afternoon. Yes, Amadou, thank you. Yeah, you see, now the critics would say there is a problem with the major premise. Why? What Clarke says is a DB or a CB, whereas the critic says it should have been a DB or non-DB. You see, the first one is what Clarke used. Every being is a DB or a CB, but critics say that is not correct. It should have been a DB or non-DB. What is this non-DB? I don't know, you are familiar with the two terms in logic, contrary and contradictory. Contrary are just opposites. For example, black, white. You see? Or long, short. This is what we call in English antonyms, opposites. But DB, non-DB, these are called contradictory, like white, non-white. Now, what is the major difference? In opposition or in antonyms, when we say white and black, they don't exhaust, they don't cover all the ranges of colors in a spectrum. You see, in a color spectrum, you can talk about different kind of colors. Of these many colors, only two are specified, like black and white. But when you take contradictory, for example, DB or non-DB or white or non-white, both together, you cover the entire range of colors. Now, why critics questioned Clarke? Because, as I said, Anselm's definition gave three options. Number one, explained by other. Number two, explained by nothing. And third, explained by itself. Now, explained by other is a dependent being. Explained by itself is self-existent being. But there is a third one, the middle one, explained by nothing. That's what critics take up. The so-called skeptics, materialist, naturalist, they would say this should be the correct explanation, explained by nothing. Now, based on this second option, that is explained by nothing, the critics explain this universe. They would say this universe is nothing. Now, please listen carefully. Is a chain of dependent beings produced one from the other in infinite progression without any original cause at all. I know it's a bit difficult to remember. I'm going to repeat. What is a universe? It's all a collection of dependent beings. Remember dependent beings definition? A being whose existence is accounted for by the causal activity of the other. So a chain of dependent beings, what the critics say, one produced by the other in infinite progression, but without any original cause. Now, how does Clarke respond to these critiques, explanation of this universe? Clarke answer is an yes and a no. What is that yes? He would say an infinite progression of dependent being is possible. Why? Why infinite progression is possible? Anybody? Why infinite progression is possible? Because here he uses the mathematics. In mathematics, there is no last number. Numbers are infinite. You say any number, you can say +1, or you can say any number, you can say -1. In other words, numbers are ad infinitum. It goes on infinitely without any stop. Therefore, he would say this chain of dependent beings can progress infinitely. There is no problem. But what is Clarke's objection? This progression cannot be of dependent beings. You see, for that he puts forward two arguments, argument from within and argument from without. Argument from within, ad intra, argument from without, ad extra. Now first I take argument from outside, ad extra. Are you familiar with a little bit of Latin? Ad extra means argument from outside. Now what is the argument from outside? He says if what the critics, what the skeptics, what the naturalists say is true, this collection of infinite series of dependent beings cannot be caused from outside. Why? They would say all what is in the series, and apart from the series there is nothing. Therefore nothing can cause from outside. Let me give a very simple example. Suppose you are sitting in a classroom or in a room. Just imagine that room is the whole world. Then if room is all what exists, can it be influenced from outside? No, not at all, because there is nothing except from the classrooms. That is exactly what he is saying. If the theists say, if the critics say, if the skeptics say that the universe is an infinite series of dependent beings, then that series cannot be caused from outside. Now the second argument, ad intra, that is from within. What is the argument from within? They say take the chain of dependent beings. By very definition, a dependent being cannot be a necessary being. And if a part is not necessary, the whole can never be necessary. Remember the relation between part and whole. That's also applicable in literature. From knowing one author, for example, you know Shakespeare's one play, because my thesis was on Hamlet. By reading Hamlet, you can make a general conclusion about all the writings of Shakespeare. Because from a particular play, you can speak about the entire plays of Shakespeare. Because from part, you cannot deduce a conclusion about the whole. On the contrary, if you know the whole, you can also speak about the part. For example, there are 100 cows, and you say all cows are black. Now, what about one cow? surely it's also black. On the contrary, if you say, I know one cow and that is black, therefore can I say all cows are black? That may not be true. You see, therefore, based on this argument from without and within, Clarke concludes, you see, this infinite series which cannot be caused from within and which cannot be necessary from within cannot be a reality unless there is another being, a different type of being, which he call self-existent being. Once again, an infinite series of being which cannot be caused from without and which cannot be necessary from within. Still, if they exist, there must be an explanation, and that explanation can be given only by the self-existent being. Therefore, he would say his argument is true. The major premise that every being must be either a DB or a CB is true. Now, quickly, I know time is getting far. Now we go to the minor premise. Not every being can be a DB. Now here there are so many criticism leveled by all types of people except a few supporters. Now I am going to pick up two important, which is quite well known, two criticisms. Number one, Clarke is accused of making a mistake in treatment. And second, a mistake in inference. Now, what is the mistake in treatment? He would say, because a collection of dependent beings needs an explanation, just as a single being needs an explanation. Once again, mistake of treating the collection of dependent beings as if it is a single dependent being. I can give an example, then it will be more clear for you. It is as if treating an album as if it is a single stamp. That is the first mistake allegedly accused of Clarke. What is that? Considering or taking an album of stamps as if it were a stamp. What is the response of Clarke? Clarke would say, no, I don't do that mistake. Moreover, he would say, if anybody equates an album of stamps to a stamp, is a real mistake. However, having said that, we can ask different types of questions regarding, one, about the album. Second question regarding a stamp. A third question, very generic question, after all, what is stamp? You see, there are questions at different levels. Question about the album, which is a collection of stamps. Secondly, question about a stamp. And thirdly, a very general question about what is stamp. So that is the first response. Now the second criticism, this is later raised by Bertrand Russell. I don't know you heard about Bertrand Russell. Russell says very funny argument. He says Clarke is making a mistake in inference. What is that? Because every individual being needs an explanation, you also infer that a collection of dependent beings needs an explanation. And his example is very funny. Every human being has a mother. Therefore, the entire humanity as a whole should have a mother. I don't know, you follow that example? From one, you are generalizing to the collection. Every human person has a mother. Therefore, Russell argues that the humanity as a whole should have a mother. And what could be the response of the supporters of Clarke? He would say the argument of Bertrand Russell is very silly. It is rationally untenable. It is as if asking that in a huge collection, because one item is light in weight, the whole collection is light in weight. There is a counter argument by supporters. What is that? Russell thinks that because a single item in the collection is light in weight, therefore the entire collection is light in weight. We know that is a nonsense. What we can say about a collection, if one item is, let's say, 1 kilo, the collection will be definitely more than 1 kilo. You see? So that is the counter argument. Then moreover, Clarke supporters would say we don't need to make such a generalized inference. Rather, philosophers have at their disposal the famous principle called PSR. PSR means principle of sufficient reason. Principle of sufficient reason. What does it mean? Whatever exists should have a cause for its existence. Whatever exists should have a cause for its existence. Now, last attempt. How do we know this PSR is true? Some people will argue it is given to us in intuition. Therefore, we don't need any argument. It is given in intuition. But critics would say that intuition is not given to everybody. Therefore, we can't trust. Therefore, they reject it. Now, a second argument, which is very popular today, which is proposed by the scientist Karl Popper. I don't know how many of you have heard about Karl Popper. He introduced what we call the principle of falsification. Have you heard about principle of falsification? Principle of falsification. This is in contrast to principle of verification, which we use in science. Science is based on the principle of verification. For example, H2O is equal to water. You can go to the laboratory. You can mix hydrogen and oxygen in the ratio of 2:1. And if it produces, you can verify whether it is water or not. But certain things you cannot verify. For example, we say all humans are mortal. That's a very common expression, statement. All humans are mortal. But how do you verify? How do you verify? There is no way whatsoever you can verify that statement. Rather, Karl Popper would say it's not to verify, but you can falsify. What is that falsification would mean? You take that statement to be true until there is one instance, one example, whereby you can prove that there is a human person who is beyond mortality, death. At that moment, that statement, all men are mortal, will be falsified. Similarly, Clarke supporters would say the PSR, principle of sufficiency reason, whatever exists must have a cause for existence, should be taken to be true until it is falsified. In other words, the major premise and the minor premise are proven to be true. Therefore, Clarke would say his conclusion is true. That is, there exists a self-existent being, and that self-existent being